She was carrying a tray worth more than her monthly rent, when the most dangerous man in Seoul looked up and noticed her for the very first time. Maya Brooks had worked the 31st floor of the Myeongdong Grand for exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of perfectly pressed uniforms, of memorizing a menu that changed every single night, of moving through a room full of people who had never once in their lives been told no. She had learned quickly that in the velour room, guests were not customers. They were royalty. And royalty did not wait, did not repeat themselves, and absolutely did not tolerate being corrected by a black American woman from Chicago who had no business being this far from home. She knew all of that. She had accounted for all of that. And she walked toward table 7 anyway. Kim Sun-woo was the kind of man who made a room rearrange itself around him without saying a single word. He was watching Seoul through the floor-to-ceiling glass like the city was something he owned and was simply deciding what to do with next. Across from him sat his fiancée. Park Seo-yeon was beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful, deliberately, precisely, with no detail left to accident. She was the eldest daughter of the Park Corporation, one of Korea's most powerful conglomerates, and she wore that fact the way other women wore perfume. Invisible, pervasive, impossible to ignore once you noticed it. The engagement between Park Seo-yeon and Kim Sun-woo had been announced 6 months earlier. To the public, it was simply 2 powerful families joining hands. To Sun-woo, it was a clean business arrangement. The Kim organization's operational depth paired with the Park Corporation's legitimate corporate reach. No affection required, none expected. Maya reached the table, set down the first course, poured the water without spilling a single drop. "I want the Wagyu." Maya looked up. Seo-yeon hadn't looked at her. "The Wagyu isn't on tonight's menu," Maya said. Her voice was even, professional. The tone she had learned in her first year of law school, the one that communicated complete competence without a single note of apology. "May I suggest that—" "I didn't ask what's on the menu." Now Seo-yeon looked at her. Her eyes moved from Maya's face to her name tag, and back again with the unhurried contempt of someone cataloguing something beneath their attention. "I said, I want the Wagyu. Go tell the kitchen to make it. I understand, and I apologize. But the kitchen, you apologize." Seo-yeon repeated it, as if tasting something that had gone bad. She set her water glass down with a small, precise click that somehow carried to 3 surrounding tables. "Do you have any idea who you are speaking to right now?" The room shifted. Not dramatically. This was not a room for drama. But Maya did not look away. She held Seo-yeon's gaze with a steadiness that was somehow more unsettling than any raised voice could have been, and said, "I'm sorry, but the Wagyu is not available tonight. I can bring you something exceptional if you'll allow me to choose." Seo-yeon's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened into something that had very little to do with a menu. "Let me be very clear with you." Her voice dropped to a register that carried further than a shout. "I don't know what kind of establishment you're accustomed to working in, but in rooms like this, the staff do not tell guests what is and is not possible. The staff find a way." She let that sit. "Is that concept difficult to understand, or is there a language barrier I should account for?" 4 tables were listening now. Guests who would not look directly at the exchange, but whose stillness said everything. Maya looked at her, with the full focused attention she had once given hostile witnesses in mock trial, and said quietly, without a tremor, "There is no language barrier. The answer is still no. I'll give you a moment to look at the menu." She set the leather menu down, turned, and walked back toward the service station at the same unhurried pace she'd arrived with, not rushing, not fleeing, walking. The room exhaled, and Kim Sun-woo, who had not moved and had not spoken, and had barely appeared to blink for almost 2 full minutes, watched her walk away from his table, and felt something shift in his chest that he did not immediately have a name for. If you're already feeling Maya right now, tap that like button, and make sure you're subscribed, because you are not going to want to miss where this goes. The dinner continued. The food arrived. Seo-yeon ate without commenting further on it, which was its own kind of verdict. Sun-woo ate without tasting much of anything, because he was thinking about a woman he had no strategic reason to think about, and the fact that he was thinking about her anyway was itself information he wasn't ignoring. "You're quiet tonight," Seo-yeon said, halfway through the second course. "I'm thinking about the Daegu contract," he said. It wasn't true. It came out smoothly anyway. He had been managing rooms long enough to lie without effort when the truth wasn't anyone's business. "Of course you are," she said, and went back to her plate. When he excused himself between courses, he did not go to the restroom. Maya was restocking the service station in the corridor when she heard footsteps stop behind her. She turned. Sun-woo stood a few feet away, watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not pity, not the discomfort of a man managing a scene, but something more direct. The look of someone simply paying attention. "Are you all right?" he asked. Of everything she had prepared herself for in this job, in this city, that question was not on the list. "I'm fine," she said. He nodded once, slowly, like filing the answer rather than accepting it. She does that. Most people apologize. "I'm aware. You didn't." "No," Maya said, "I didn't." He studied her for a moment. The way you study something that doesn't match the description you were given. "Most of my staff would have brought the Wagyu. Found it somewhere. Borrowed it from another kitchen if they had to." "I'm not your staff," Maya said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "No," he agreed. "You're not." Maya looked at him a beat longer than courtesy required. "Your fiancé has very strong opinions about things that don't belong to her." The words were out before she'd fully decided to say them. She watched his face for the reaction she expected. The offence, the reminder of exactly who she was speaking to. It didn't come. "Yes," he said simply. "She does." She picked up her tray and walked back through the door before he could say anything else. Before she could say anything else. Before either of them could turn the moment into something neither of them was ready to name. Sun-woo stood alone in the corridor a moment longer than he should have. He had been threatened by prosecutors, mocked by rivals who wanted him dead, and said so to his face. Nobody had ever said something that simple in that tone, and walked away before he could respond. He told himself it was the novelty. He did not entirely believe himself. That night, in a small apartment in a quieter corner of the city, Maya sat at a desk covered in organized files and tried very hard not to think about Kim Sun-woo. She failed, mostly. But she made tea, opened the master folder, and ran her finger down a timeline she had built over 3 years. Financial movements, shell company registrations, a pattern of systematic destruction that had dismantled 7 businesses across 3 countries before it reached her father's firm and took it apart in 30 days. On the wall above the desk, a photograph. Anthony Brooks, standing outside his Chicago law office the year it opened, grinning like a man who had built something that would last forever. It had lasted 18 years. Then the Park Corporation found it. License challenges filed on technical grounds no one had raised before. Major clients simultaneously gone. Banking relationships frozen during a compliance review that found violations in 20 years of clean records. Not violence. Just the careful, patient dismantling of everything her father had built. Wire by wire. By people who knew exactly which ones to touch. Her father spent 2 years trying to rebuild before the stress finished what the case had started. Her mother fell ill from grief not long after. Her health had never fully returned. Not really, not even now, 4 years later. And Maya had been 3 semesters from finishing law school, when the tuition stopped being something she could manage. She went home, took care of her mother, worked 3 jobs, and every night after her mother was asleep, she opened her father's files and read them by lamplight at the kitchen table. The same table where he used to grade his own work, where she had learned to read contracts before she learned to drive. She finished law school online, studying between shifts, between her mother's appointments, between the slow, grinding hours of grief that nobody warns you stretch out longer than the funeral itself. She sat the Illinois bar alone, told no one beforehand, told no one after, passed. Then, 2 years ago, she sat the Korean commercial law exam on a brutal weekend on the other side of the world, and passed that too. She had not wanted a career. She had wanted a case. Her mother had asked her more than once, gently and then less gently, to let it go. Baby, come home. Live your life. I don't want anything happening to you. Your father wouldn't want this for you. Each time, Maya had said she would think about it. Each time, she went back to the files instead, because she had made a promise to herself the night of her father's funeral, quietly, alone in her car in the parking lot of the funeral home, that whoever had done this would answer for it, even if it took the rest of her 20s to make that happen. She was not coming home yet. Not until she finished what her father started. 4 days later, Sun-woo walked back into the velour room. No business dinner, no seoyeon. He requested the same section. Maya recognized him instantly. She gave nothing away, composed, professional. He ordered simply, then asked a question about the wine list that required a genuine answer. She gave one, specific, knowledgeable, the kind of answer that came from actual understanding, rather than memorized description. "You know wine," he said. "I know a little about a lot of things," she said. "It comes from reading too much." "What are you reading right now?" she told him. He asked why. She told him that too, and somewhere in the answering, the conversation stopped being a server attending a guest and became something else neither of them named. By the end of the meal they had spoken 4 separate times, about food, about a pairing, about the book, about a renovation happening across the street that she'd been narrating to herself, out of boredom on her walks to work. He listened with the focused attention of a man who didn't give it often. He left a tip that made her stand still at the service station a moment longer than necessary. Then she took out her notebook, the same one she used for case notes, and wrote down everything she'd noticed about him in the last 45 minutes. It was a longer list than she was comfortable with. That same evening, Sun-woo was having a conversation he'd been dreading since the engagement was signed. His financial director, Cho, 11 years with the organization, careful, almost to a fault, stood in the office doorway for a full 4 minutes before Sun-woo told him to come in and say it. "The shell company transfers began 18 months ago," Cho said, setting a folder on the desk. "Routed through our Gangnam accounts. Small enough individually to avoid automatic flagging. Structured to look like standard movement from the outside." He paused. "Whoever built this knew our internal architecture in considerable detail." Sun-woo looked at the numbers. He'd built this organization from the foundation up. He knew every account, every routing path, every layer of insulation constructed over 15 years specifically to protect his operation from exactly this kind of intrusion. He knew it, the way you know something built with your own hands. Every joint, every weak point, every place pressure would show first. Someone had been inside all of it, patiently, for 1.5 years. "Where does the trail lead?" he asked. Cho hesitated 1 second. That hesitation was its own answer. "Park Corporation." The office went silent. Sun-woo sat with that. His grandmother had called the evening the engagement was announced, and instead of congratulations, she'd been quiet a long moment and said, "Be careful, Sun Wu. I don't trust that family. I don't like that woman." Not evidence. Not a reason she could point to. Just an old woman's instinct that he had never once before been foolish enough to overrule. He had told her it was business, that the numbers made sense. That sentiment was a liability he couldn't afford in a deal this size. He picked up his phone and called her. Past 10 o'clock. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been waiting for the call without knowing it was coming. "I think you might have been right, Grandma," he said. "About what?" she said, not smug, just direct, the way she always was. "Seoul." He paused, the words harder to say than he expected. "Someone's been moving money through my accounts. 18 months, undetected. It traces back to the parks." Silence on the line. Long enough that he almost asked if she was still there. "I never had evidence, Sun Wu," she finally said. "I never told you she was dangerous. I told you I didn't like her. There's a difference, and you should have asked me which one I meant." "I know. Move carefully," she said. "Whoever built this built it patiently. You take it apart the same way, or you lose more than money." He sat in the dark of his office a long time after the call ended, looking at a city that had just become considerably more complicated than it had been that morning. He visited Maya's English class on a Tuesday. She taught 3 mornings a week in a small cafe 20 minutes from the hotel. 7 students, ages ranging from 11 to over 20. The kind of class that was the most unguarded part of her week. She was mid-sentence at the whiteboard, mid-laugh at something a student had said, when she turned to check the room and stopped. Sun Wu was sitting in the last row, dark tattoos on both hands resting on the small cafe table. 6 other students stared at him with the particular alarm of people who couldn't identify exactly what they were looking at, but understood instinctively that it was significant. Maya looked at him for 2 full seconds. Then she turned back to the whiteboard and kept teaching, calling on him twice, correcting his deliberately mediocre answers with the same brisk efficiency she gave the 16-year-old who kept confusing his tenses. No commentary, no acknowledgement beyond what the lesson required. When the last student left, she set her marker down and crossed her arms. "You don't need an English class." "No," he agreed. "So what are you doing here?" "The teacher is exceptional." "Flattery," she said, "is not a substitute for grammar." "I'm not flattering you," he said. "I'm being accurate. There's a difference." She studied him a moment, the same look she'd give a contract clause that didn't quite sit right. Then she picked up her bag. "Walk with me. I have a shift." He stood immediately, like he'd been waiting for the invitation the whole class. They walked through mid-morning Seoul, the city moving around them at its usual impossible velocity. She didn't perform anything for him, pointed out a building she'd been watching get constructed since she arrived, complained about a transit delay that had added 12 minutes to her commute, asked him directly what it was actually like to run an organization like his in a city trying to look entirely legitimate to the rest of the world. He laughed, real, surprised out of him, the kind of laugh that reached his eyes before he could decide whether to let it. "Complicated," he said, "I imagine." Then, without changing her tone, without any warning that she was about to hand him the centre of her entire life, she looked at him for a few seconds and began, "My father was a lawyer in Chicago. He believed the law protected people who built things the right way. That if you were careful and clean, the system would defend you." She kept walking, her voice perfectly even. 8 years ago, he started investigating a fraud case. Shell companies, redirected capital. A pattern that had been running for years under legitimate cover. Before he could file anything, his firm was gone. 30 days. License challenges, frozen accounts. Every client gone. Completely legal. Completely intentional. A pause. Brief, controlled. He died 2 years later. The stress took him before anything else could. My mother got sick from the grief and never quite recovered. I was 3 semesters from finishing law school. I dropped out and went home. Another pause. And this time when she spoke, her voice had dropped just slightly. Just enough that he had to lean in to catch it. The company was Korean. Sunwoo stopped walking. Maya stopped beside him. Which company? His voice had gone careful, in the specific way of a man who already half knows the answer and needs to hear it said out loud anyway. She looked at him directly. The Park Corporation. The street continued around them. A bicycle bell, a delivery van pulling away from the curb, the entire indifferent machinery of a city that had no idea it was the backdrop to something enormous. Sunwoo stared at her, something shifting behind his expression. Not shock, exactly, because he was not a man who shocked easily. More like the specific sensation of a door clicking open in a wall he had been certain was solid. I know how Park Corporation operates. I have 8 years of documented evidence. You came to Seoul to build a case, he said, not a question. Yes. And the job at the velour room, access, she said simply. Seo Yon is a regular there. People talk at dinner, especially when they think the waitress is invisible. She held his gaze. I didn't plan for any of this. I didn't know you'd be there. I didn't know any of it would go this direction. But here we are, he said. But here we are, she agreed. He held her gaze a long moment, and in it she watched him recalculate. Not retreat, not suspicion, but the specific recalibration of a man realizing the woman in front of him was not at all what he had assumed. Come to my office tomorrow morning, he said. Bring everything you have. She didn't answer right away. She was reading him the way she'd been trained to read people, looking for the gap between what was said and what was meant, the places where a performance cracks. She found nothing that alarmed her, and that itself told her something. 9 o'clock, she said. Don't be late. She walked toward the hotel without looking back. He stood on the pavement and watched her go, trying to name the thing happening in his chest, and failed at it in the most interesting way possible. Now here is where this story takes a turn, that nobody saw coming. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it right now, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of what happens next. The next morning, Maya spread her files across his conference table and watched his face as he read. She had organized everything with the methodical precision of a woman who had been constructing this case in her head for 3 years. Timeline first, then corporate structure, then the financial maneuvers connecting Park Corporation to the destruction of 7 businesses across 3 countries. Her father's firm was placed deliberately in the middle of the list, not the front, because she needed him to see the pattern in full before he ever saw her name inside it. Sunwoo read in silence for 11 minutes. He turned each page with the focused attention of a man giving something the full respect it deserved. When he set down the last page, he looked up. You passed the bar, he said, not a question. Both of them, Illinois, Korean commercial law. When? 2 years ago. You never practiced. No. She held his gaze. I didn't want a career. I wanted a case. There's a difference, and I've spent 3 years making sure I understood it. Something moved through his expression, the look of a man discovering the actual dimensions of what he was dealing with. He pulled a folder from his own stack and set it beside hers. Their papers overlapped on the table. 2 timelines, finally meeting in the middle. The internal account movements traced to a subsidiary registered in the Cayman Islands in 2019. I have the registration documents. If this connects to what you have... Here. She was already reading, finger moving down the page, cross-referencing with her own timeline. This transfer date matches the exact week my father's banking license was challenged. They were testing the architecture before deploying it at full scale. She looked up. Your organization was the end game, Sun-Woo. The largest target. The one with enough legitimate infrastructure that, once they controlled it, they could take the Park Corporation public on the Seoul Exchange. She let that land. And when they didn't need you anymore, they would have triggered the evidence they'd already planted in your accounts. You take the liability. They take the exit. Clean. The room was completely still. Sun-Woo stood and walked to the window, looking out at Seoul for a long moment. When he turned back, his face had settled into that particular dangerous composure of a man who has finished being surprised, and moved directly into deciding what to do about it. "What do you need?" he said. "A federal financial crimes contact. Someone clean. Someone who acts on legitimate evidence regardless of where it comes from. Inspector Yoon, 12 years in financial crimes. He owes me a debt that has nothing to do with corruption. He'll act on this. Then we build the submission together," she said. "I construct the legal framework. You provide the internal documentation. We submit through Yoon as a third-party anonymous disclosure. Park Corporation never sees it coming until it's already in front of a grand jury." "How long?" he asked. 3 weeks. If we work every day." "Every day," he said. Across the city, in the back of a car moving through Gangnam traffic, Seo-yeon was reading a report on her phone that made her jaw tighten by a fraction so small, only someone watching very closely would have caught it. The waitress from the velour room. American, English teacher, working 2 jobs, 14 months in Seoul. Seen with Sun-Woo on 4 separate occasions in the past 8 days. Most recently walked with him through the cafe district for 23 minutes. Seo-yeon looked out the window at the city sliding past. She had entered the engagement with completely clear eyes. Her family had spent over a year quietly, surgically working to bankrupt portions of the Kim organization's outside interests. The same playbook used on 7 other businesses before this one. The same patient dismantling that had taken apart a Chicago law firm 8 years earlier. The engagement to Sun-Woo was never about affection. It was the final piece of access her family needed. Proximity to his accounts, his contacts, the inner workings of an empire her father wanted, folded quietly into theirs. Sun-Woo knew none of it. He thought it was business, clean and mutual. He had no idea he was the target, not the partner. 6 more months, and her family's work would have been finished and untraceable. Now there was a waitress who had stood in the middle of the velour room and looked her dead in the eye without once looking away. Seo-yeon had dismissed it that night as the defiance of someone who didn't understand the room she was standing in. She was beginning to reconsider that completely. "Keep watching her," she told her assistant. "Everywhere she goes, everyone she talks to." The car moved through traffic. Her face stayed perfectly composed, her hands folded in her lap, pressed together a fraction harder than usual. They worked in the cafe every morning for 3 weeks. Sun-Woo arrived at 9:30. Maya arrived at 9, notes already organized because she was that kind of person, and had stopped pretending otherwise around him sometime in the 2nd week. He brought financial documents. She read them the way she'd been trained, systematically, surgically, margin notes in her small, precise handwriting that revealed she was operating nowhere near the limits of her understanding. On the 4th day, she worked through a complex subsidiary filing and found a structural irregularity in under 5 minutes. He had 3 retained lawyers who had spent 2 weeks missing it entirely. He set his coffee down and looked at her. "You see it differently." "My father taught me to read corporate structure like music," she said. "He said the money always tells the truth. You just have to know what notes to listen for. A brief shadow crossed her face, there and gone. He was right about everything except the part where knowing the truth would be enough to protect him. He sounds like he was remarkable. He was, she said simply, then turning the question back the way she always did when a conversation got too close to her own grief. Your grandmother raised you. Since I was 9, after my parents passed. What's she like? Something softened in his face, unguarded in a way she hadn't seen from him before. The smartest person I know. She told me she didn't trust Seoyeon the day the engagement was announced. Didn't like her. Couldn't say why exactly. Just an instinct she's never once been wrong about in 73 years. And you didn't listen. I thought I was being rational. I thought she was being protective, the way grandmothers are. She was being right, Maya said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. No, he said, looking at her like the sentence applied to more than one person in his life. They're not. The cafe stayed quiet around them, morning light falling across their overlapping papers. Maya looked back down at the documents, but something warm had settled into her face. Something she had stopped trying very hard to hide somewhere around the end of week 2. She was falling. She knew it. She was annoyed about it and completely unable to stop it, and some mornings, walking to the cafe before he arrived, she caught herself smiling for no reason she was willing to name out loud. But Seoyeon had run out of patience. She appeared at the cafe on a Wednesday morning before Sun-woo arrived, pulling out the chair across from Maya without invitation, without a greeting, without anything that resembled courtesy. "I want to be very clear with you," she said, her voice pleasant in the precise way designed to make the words underneath land harder. "Whatever you believe is happening between you and Sun-woo, it isn't. He is engaged to me. Our families have obligations that existed long before you arrived in this city and will continue long after whatever this is has run its course." A pause. "I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you. There's a difference." Maya set her pen down, folded her hands, looked at Seoyeon with the same complete steadiness she'd offered 6 weeks earlier in the dining room. "Is there a difference? Because from where I'm sitting, a woman who humiliated me publicly in a room full of people, who's had me followed since my 2nd week in this city, and who is now sitting across from me uninvited to tell me to stay away from her fiancé, that reads less like information and more like fear." Seoyeon's composure flickered. Just for a second, just long enough to confirm what Maya already suspected. "You should be very careful," Seoyeon said. "Of what, exactly?" Maya leaned forward slightly, her voice still quiet, still completely even. "Of a family that built its empire bankrupting lawyers who ask the right questions? That dismantles businesses through shell companies and manufactured violations? That uses men like Sun-woo as infrastructure they plan to discard the moment they're done with him?" She held Seoyeon's gaze without blinking. "I know what your family does. I know the playbook, every step of it, because my father found it 8 years ago in Chicago and your family destroyed him for finding it. I've spent 3 years becoming the person who could finish what he started. So, by all means, be very clear with me." The silence was absolute. Seoyeon stood slowly. Her face stayed a perfect mask, but her breathing had changed. Shallow, controlled. "You have no idea what you're walking into," she said quietly. "I've been walking into it for 3 years," Maya said. "I know every step." Seoyeon left without another word. Maya sat very still for 30 seconds. Then she took out her phone and typed 2 words to Sun-woo. "She knows." He arrived in 8 minutes. Sat down, listened without interrupting as Maya told him everything. The visit, the words, the exact look on Seoyeon's face in the moment she realized who she was actually talking to. Something cold and resolved moved through Sun Woo's expression as she spoke. Something well past anger. When she finished, he was quiet a long moment. "She's been accessing the accounts," he said flatly. "That's what the proximity was for. The engagement. All of it." He said it like a man closing a door he should have shut a long time ago. "I'm ending it. Should have a long time ago. Sun Woo..." "This isn't a discussion," he said, not harshly, just finally. "I entered that agreement in good faith. She used it to get inside my organization's infrastructure. That's done." He looked at her directly. "I should have listened to my grandmother 6 months ago." That evening he ended the engagement formally, through the appropriate legal and family channels, absorbing every financial and political consequence the Parks threw at him from 4 directions at once, without moving an inch. He had weathered worse from more dangerous people for 15 years. He paid this cost the same way, without drama, without hesitation, without once looking back to see if anyone noticed. The submission package went to Inspector Yoon on a Thursday, after 48 hours of Maya working through both nights. Files spread across every surface of her apartment, the entire architecture of everything her father had found, and everything she'd built on top of it. Shell company registrations, 6 years of wire transfer records, the chain connecting Seo-yeon's direct account access to unauthorized Kim organization transfers, the original Chicago files, cross-referenced, authenticated, with no gaps left anywhere. Somewhere in the second night, she sat on the floor surrounded by it all, holding her father's photograph, and cried for the first time in 3 years. Not only from grief, from something that felt like the beginning of release, like a weight she'd carried alone for so long that she'd stopped registering it as weight had finally found somewhere to go. She wiped her face, put the photograph back in the front of the master folder, where it had lived since Chicago, kept working. Yoon called Sun Woo on a Friday evening, his voice carefully neutral in the way of a man who had just read something significant. "The cleanest third-party disclosure I've received in 12 years, he said. "Where did you find the lawyer?" "She found me," Sun Woo said. The Park Corporation's accounts froze within 72 hours. The investigation moved fast once the structure was visible. A web this complex, every thread pulled, brought 3 more with it. Asset freezes. A grand jury convened inside 2 weeks. Corporate documents subpoenaed. The Park family, who had spent years constructing what they believed was a perfectly insulated empire, discovered the person who had mapped their insulation had also documented exactly how to take it apart. Seo-yeon's name appeared in the indictment on a Tuesday morning. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy to commit financial crimes across multiple jurisdictions. The charges were detailed, specific, devastating, and airtight. Every count supported by documentation, built by a woman who had spent 3 years making sure there were no gaps anywhere. Maya saw the news on her phone between classes. She read it twice. Then finished teaching, because some things you finish even when your whole chest is shaking. When the last student left, she sat in the quiet cafe and called her mother. "Mama," she said when the call connected. "Baby." Her mother's voice, warm, slightly careful, the way it had been since her father died. "What's happened?" "It's done," Maya said, her voice steady. "The people who destroyed Daddy's firm. It's in front of a grand jury, all of it, everything he found. It's done, Mama." The silence on the line stretched a long time. "Oh, baby," her mother finally said, and the sound in those 2 words held grief and relief and pride and exhaustion all folded into each other, the way they do when something has been carried for years and is finally being set down. "Your daddy would have been so proud of you. So proud." Maya pressed her free hand flat against the table. "I know, Mama," she said. "I know." She didn't mention Sun Woo yet. That needed to be said in person, in a kitchen in Chicago, where her mother could see her face when she said it. Sun Woo appeared at the cafe 30 minutes later, sat across from her, looked at the red still around her eyes she hadn't quite managed to fix. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Come meet my grandmother." Maya blinked. "Now?" "She's been asking about you for 2 weeks. I'm running out of ways to explain why I haven't brought you yet." Maya almost laughed. "You told her about me." "She asked," he said simply. "I don't lie to my grandmother." They drove to an older part of the city. Narrow streets, houses set back from the road, the kind of neighborhood where modern Seoul seemed to have quietly agreed to wait outside. His grandmother's house had a garden too large for anywhere in this city to reasonably hold, and she was standing at the door when they arrived, which meant she'd been watching for the car. She was small, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who had seen everything and forgotten nothing, who wore her 73 years like authority instead of burden. She looked at Sun Woo when they came through the gate and said nothing at all. Then she looked at Maya for a long moment. Not rudely, but the way someone reads a page they intend to fully understand before they respond to it. "You have good eyes," she said finally in careful English. "You look at him like you see him." Sun Woo, beside Maya, went very still. "He's not a difficult person to see," Maya said. His grandmother made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh and ushered them both inside. They stayed 3 hours. "Call me Halmony." "Everyone who matters does," she said, pouring tea, asking Maya about Chicago, about her father, about law school, about the case in a way that made it clear she already knew most of it, and simply wanted to hear it in Maya's own words. Maya told her everything, without softening it. Halmony listened the whole way through, without interrupting once. The way you listen when you understand that real listening is its own form of respect. When Maya finished, the older woman reached across the table and covered her hand. "You carried that a long time," she said. "By yourself?" "Yes," Maya said. "You don't have to anymore." 20 minutes later, Sun Woo stood in the kitchen doorway and watched his grandmother and Maya laughing together over something Halmony had said about his terrible childhood handwriting. Maya's whole face open, unguarded, lit up in a way he had only ever seen through a cafe window before today. Something moved in his chest that had nothing to do with strategy or evidence or anything he could file away into a folder. He had never once, in his entire adult life, brought a woman here. He had not expected it to feel like this, like watching the 2 people who mattered most simply enjoy each other, easily, without him having to manage a single part of it. He loved her. He had been circling the word for weeks, telling himself it was something else. Admiration, gratitude, the particular intensity of shared purpose. Watching her laugh in his grandmother's kitchen, he stopped circling it entirely. Later, walking Maya back through the garden toward the gate, the evening cooling around them, the air thick with something green and old, Sun Woo was quiet for a long moment. "She's never said that to anyone," he said. "Any of it." "Sun Woo." He looked at her. "I need you to know this has nothing to do with the case," he said, "or what we built together, or gratitude, or strategy. I need you to know that clearly, separately, before I ask you anything else." "I know," she said quietly. "I've known for a while." He reached into his jacket, knelt down and brought out a small box and opened it. "You came to Seoul to win," he said. "You won. I'm asking you to stay. Will you marry me, Maya Brooks?" Maya looked at the box, then at him, really looked, with the same full attention she'd given him since the corridor. "One condition," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Name it. We go see my mother first, in Chicago. She needs to know you exist before I say yes to anything. She needs to see your face. Book the flights then, he said. Sunwoo. So, yes. Yes, she said. And if this is the kind of story that kept you here from the very first second Maya picked up that tray, comment below right now. I want to know. What was the exact moment she won you over? Was it the restaurant, the corridor, the cafe table, the garden? Tell me in the comments, because I read every single one, and this community always has the best answers on this channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the next story is already coming, and it is going to hit even harder than this one. Like this video, if Maya Brooks is exactly the kind of woman this world needed to see today. She came to Seoul to win. She won everything.